Hey designers, welcome back to the studio. Today we're actually going to take a look at some of these art kits that I set you up with at school and kind of pick them apart and see what's in there. Make sure you have everything that you're supposed to have and also get a sense for what can stay here at your home studio and what's going to have to go back and forth between school and home. Right? Some of your kit doesn't have to go back and forth every day, especially you 3D design students who have a lot of extra supplies in your kit. But your kits are full of basically everything you're going to need to be successful this semester. I may have to distribute small things here and there, and you may have to find something, around the house, but for the most part, everything that I've given you in these kits should set you up for every project that we'll do. Before we talk too much about the kits though, I just want to say a thing or two about the studio space that you'll be working. This is my studio space. I'll introduce you to a few things kind of that I've got set up that make my work a little bit less stressful, a little bit more easy, and things that you may want to try to implement in your home studio, but it doesn't have to be quite so elaborate. What I want you to think about though is the place that you're going to be doing the work at home should have a couple of specific things, right? You're going to need a little bit of elbow room. I do my best to keep my work surface clear of all the clutter, right? A studio is a place for study, and study is directly connected to focus. And clutter in my studio tends to be sort of like the anti-focus stealing, disease. If I start to get too much clutter in my workspace, I can no longer focus, and when I can't focus, I can't get that studying or the studio work done. So in general, in my space, if it's a project I'm not currently working on, I try to put it away or I store it someplace else. Now the other thing about that elbow space is the elbow room is we're going to be working on projects that you're going to want to have set up and leave set up. So working at the kitchen counter, working in the couch in front of the TV is not a really good idea because you'll have to clear all that stuff off probably at the end of your studio session. It's a lot nicer to be working in your studio space and just be able to leave a few things set up and not have to move them constantly. Later on, especially during our drawing unit, we'll actually set up a lighting situation that you can't touch for at least 2 or 3 days. So that means your studio space has to be a location that can't be messed with. You very likely will probably try to work in the same location as you're doing the homework for your other classes, and that's okay just so long as you have a little bit of extra room, right, to kind of dedicate specifically to your art making. We got about 30 minutes or so of homework I'm expecting you guys to work on per week outside of class. So consider that, right? You're going to be at this place for at least 30 minutes a day in class and at least 30 minutes, probably more, outside of class, especially if you really get into your projects. Now say you wanted to kind of set up a space that was beyond just kind of like a typical desk that you were studying under. An art studio should have a couple of other specific things. A nice bright lighting space is a really great idea. If you're in a basement, that's going to mean you're going to need some kind of overhead light and some kind of side light. Even better than a basement space, though, would be a space that has some natural lighting. Parking next to a window would be really, really great. Natural light, even though sometimes it can seem a little dim, where like a bright LED light seems really, really intensely bright, I promise you that that natural light, not only is it significantly brighter than most of the lights you have in your home, but the quality of that light coming into the space is much gentler. It'll be much nicer on your eyes. It'll also make your photographs and your drawings and your paintings feel much better in your work. This is also a space where I have ready access to a wireless internet connection. I also have easy access to electrical connections to run either different types of tools or different types of cameras. And it's also a place where I can fairly easily pin up some projects that I'm currently working on right at my eye level. So if I want to set something up or if I want to take a look at some of my sketches, I have some tack boards set up for that as well. Now in my setup, I also have a few different sort of camera rigs. That's really specific to this kind of encounter though, is I'm going to be recording a lot of videos for you guys. Typically, I'm not doing a lot of video recording in my own studio, but I could show you in a later video how I've rigged up the camera system in order to make this well-lit, easily streamable art studio as well. So let's take a look at these art tubes. So when I gave you your 2D design kits at school, this is basically what we got set up with. I got it broken down into a few different places. We've got a folder full of a bunch of loose materials, a sketchbook that's set up here. We have an art tube full of some other loose art making materials, and you have a set of watercolors. So here's what I want this tutorial to basically be like, right? Consider it two things. One is I'm introducing you to the basic names and how you might arrange the different parts of your kit, but also, and maybe more practically, I want to make sure that you guys have all of these pieces. So consider it like an inventory. If I hit something in this tutorial that you don't have, reconnect with me via email or connect with me at school, and we'll make sure that we get you a replacement. In your watercolor kits should be a new set of these pans. Now, we've got some colors in here that we probably won't even use. We're primarily going to make use of our primary colors this semester, and we might as well notice it. It comes with this really small brush that actually won't work so great for the watercolors that we need. It's a little bit too detailed, but we will need this brush for other purposes. So you've got your pan of watercolors and a nice brush. Now I'm going to scoot the folder and the sketchbook out of the way and just check out what's in this tube. Now, what's in here will make a huge mess if you're not careful. Okay, so with things arranged this way, it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. I've got paint over here, I've got drawing media over here, cutting tools, and some glue. So let's kind of walk through it, right? Watercolors we already talked about, but let's talk about these two other brushes that are included in your kit. There is another Blick number 8 watercolor brush or wet media brush. Now the bristles in this brush are protected with a plastic sleeve. That plastic sleeve is really important because the sable hair brushes, bristles that this brush is made out of are really fragile. They're designed to kind of carry a lot of wet media, so they're going to work really, really well in our watercolors, but if they get mashed in your art tube, they'll damage the bristles and we'll have to do a restoration on them. So keep that little plastic tube on there. The other brush you guys have in your kit is a little bit more of a workhorse type brush. It has a coarse hair brush. It's the shape of it is called a filbert, right? It's just sort of more of a utility size, and it's a little bit larger. It also came with a little bit longer handle. You'll notice that all the handles were cut down. If you don't like the kind of rough edge that I left on it, we'll just use a little sandpaper and rough that back. That is the entirety of your art kit except for what I have stored in this old film canister. Now if you're careful and you pop the lid on this guy open, you'll see a bunch of white liquid on the inside. That's actually white acrylic paint. Acrylic paint is that kind of paint that your parents probably didn't let you play with much as a kid because it stains your clothes really, really badly. Same goes for when you're a teenager. Now let's just be careful to keep that lid on for two reasons. One, you don't want it to spill all over the inside of your art kit, and two, if it spills or dries out, if you have that lid kind of partially open, it'll dry out in one night. So let's keep that lid snapped closed and keep it stored with your paint stuff. Now the other thing that we've got in your art kit is a really nice cutting tool that we'll come back to over and over again. Your studio knife. You'll oftentimes hear me call it your X-Acto knife, but X-Acto is not the brand, right? This is just a Blick knife. Now this one comes with this plastic tube. Don't throw that away. We're going to use that for something else over here with our drawing media. But I'll introduce you just briefly to this tool. We used it in class. It comes with a plastic cap on the end. Pop that plastic cap off and you've got your sharp razor blade mounted in the point. Now you've got a couple of extra blades stored inside the front cover of your sketchbook. Right now, those blades are just sort of taped in place. We'll probably leave them there for now, but carrying them back and forth to school in your sketchbook, they're likely going to get lost. So at some point, we'll peel these out and stick them someplace else in your studio. A safe place to put them might actually be inside your paint tray. That way they won't get away from you. But this knife has got a blade on the front and then a long kind of easy grip handle on the back, and I want you to essentially hold it as though you were holding a pencil. When it comes time to actually be replacing that blade, it has a screw on the back and you can unscrew the blade and unscrew the shaft and the blade pops out the top. You won't be needing to replace that blade quite so often in this class, so you have a couple of replacement blades. If you happen to be real rough on the blade and you snap more than one or something, I've got lots more blades at school. Just let me know and I'll get you another one. Make sure that as you're traveling around with this blade back and forth to school, you keep that plastic cap on and keep it secure. That way you don't accidentally get stuck in the hand as you're grabbing for a paintbrush or something like that. If you happen to lose this plastic cap, let me know. I've got a solution for you that we can use. Now, also in your art kit, you've got a tube of glue stick. Now, the glue stick is very much like the paint in that if you leave the cap off for more than a couple of hours, your glue stick will dry out. So really super important to keep that cap screwed on. We're going to need that glue stick more or less all semester. Now let's scoot over to our drawing materials. Our painting materials are really great. You even have a small rag kind of tossed into your sketchbook that'll oftentimes be used with our painting projects. But the drawing materials are arranged in this way. You've got three different hardnesses of graphite drawing pencils. We go from hard to soft, a 6H, an HB, and a 4B pencil. And if you're not sure how to kind of find on the pencil where those different hardnesses are located, it's back here on the end of the pencil for your studio, for your Blick Studio pencils, and it's labeled there. You should have one of each. If for some reason you didn't get one of each, let me know and I'll get you set up with a different one. 6H, HB, and 4B. Then you've got one more pencil in your kit, but it's not a graphite pencil, it's a white pencil. We're going to do some toned drawings this semester, and so some of you have a Prismacolor, some of you have the Blick. It's essentially sort of a waxier white drawing material. Then you've got two different kinds of pen in your art kit. You have a felt-tipped marker pen, and at the very, very point of that pen, if you look really carefully, you'll see that it's actually felt-tipped like a Sharpie marker. Now these ones are actually a Sharpie pen, right? That makes it sort of like an oily or an oil-based marker. It's permanent, right? That'll get on you and stay there. This pen is a rollerball pen, and instead of having a felt tip, the ink sort of flows out of the tip a little bit differently. These two are not necessarily like specific art supplies, they're more like an office supply, but I find them to be two really kind of nice ways to get into basic ink drawings, and then if you really like that, we could step it up with some more expensive, maybe more sophisticated ink drawing materials. Now, the other thing we've got in your art kit are two sticks of willow charcoal. And take a closer look at these things. Now, these are willow charcoal. They've been charcoalized in a kiln, and essentially, if they look like a stick, that's because that's exactly what they are. They're a burnt piece of stick, and if as soon as you start to handle them, you'll start to turn black, as well as all of your art kit will start to turn black if you're not careful with these. Also, they're very brittle, and so this plastic tube that your X-Acto knife came in actually makes for a really great place to store your sticks of charcoal until we need them. It keeps everything in your art kit from getting covered in black charcoal, and it keeps you from accidentally breaking your charcoal sticks. They still work just fine if they're broken, but the smaller the pieces are, the smaller they can actually hold on to. Imagine, for example, if you took the graphite, what you sometimes call the lead, out of a drawing pencil and were just holding on to that. It would be a really brittle, kind of snappable instrument. It also turns your hands lots of colors. With a pencil, they've wrapped that graphite in wood to make it easier to hold on to and to make it a little bit stronger. That plastic isn't necessary, we'll just get rid of that. Now the other thing I've given you are two different kinds of erasers. The brick is just kind of like your standard rubber eraser, and then this other one, keep it in the plastic for now, that's called a kneaded eraser, and we'll use it in conjunction with our charcoal. The other thing that you've got in your art tube is this sort of stretchy piece of black string. Now we're going to use this to actually turn our art tubes into an easy traveling kit. Pop the kind of end caps off of both ends of that art tube, and we're going to thread this through the pre-punched hole in the top. And tie a little overhand knot right in the top of that string. And then pull it tight, and then swing it down to the other end of the art tube, and pull a little tension into that line, and hold it tight with your thumb. Pull this one through the top, and this one gets a bit trickier to tie, but we'll do the same thing. We'll tie a little knot in the end. So now we have a knot tied in one end, and a knot tied in the other end, so that this thing has a bit of snap to it. What that's going to allow us to do is to get it threaded onto the front cover of our sketchbook and make this a traveling art kit. Once this thing is full of your art supplies, It not only keeps it well contained, but it allows you to travel fairly easily back and forth to school so that you're not having to have a separate art kit for it. It also, frankly, makes a really nice stand for doing angled drawings. Now, I highly recommend getting your name on this art tube almost immediately because inevitably one of these days you'll leave that art tube at school. You want to put it on the end cap, that's cool. Put it down the side, you want to cover it in stickers, you want to paint the outside, good on you. Now inside your sketchbooks, we've already done a little bit of work at school, but I'll just do a quick recap on that. In the back of the sketchbook, I wanted you to put a pocket. Now that pocket is specifically to store your small cutting board. Your small cutting board is going to be found inside your folder here, and as I page through this, your cutting board comes all pre-wrapped in plastic. Get rid of that. And get in the habit of storing your cutting board in the back of your sketchbook so that it always travels with you back and forth to school. Now your front pocket makes a really great place for a couple things. One, it's a great place to store your design syllabus. If you've got a printed copy, occasionally I'll be referencing that throughout the semester. It's a nice place to have that. Your front pocket is also a really great place to store a couple of other templates. Since we're using our straight edge for the very first assignment, it's a good place to have your right angle straight edge stored as well. Now, another thing I like to store in the front of my sketchbook are my circle templates. But since we're not going to use these right away, I'll just sort of set these off to the side and we'll come back to our circle templates during the drawing unit. I also highly recommend getting your name somewhere on the front cover of your sketchbook. Now, if you have your art tube attached to your sketchbook, it should be easily identifiable as your own, but because we'll be going back and forth from home, get your name on the tube, get your name on the cover of your sketchbook so that you don't lose it. The last thing I want to go through in your sketchbook is what's going on in this folder. Now, it'll be really important for us to identify what is exactly in this, what kind of papers I've got stored in this folder. It'll be important that we use the correct papers for the correct assignment. And so on some of these, because they're so close to each other in how they look and how they feel, I want to make sure that you actually write the name of the paper in the corner. So the first piece of paper on the top of mine is a couple of sheets of black construction paper. It's the only black paper that I've got in your kit, so it's no need to label that. The next couple sheets I've got in your art kit are this gray construction paper, or what's called bogus paper. Now, it's really similar looking, at least at first glance, to another couple sheets of paper that I have in the art kit. They look almost like the same tone, and in fact the bogus paper was modeled in color after this paper. This is called newsprint. It's called newsprint because it's exactly the same kind of paper that they used to print newspapers on. Now, it has a really different feel on the surface, and it has a really different sound. That's the first way I usually tell. When you pick up a piece of newsprint, it sort of sounds high-pitched. When you pick up a piece of bogus construction paper, it's got sort of a lower pitch to it. The newsprint paper is also a little bit smoother. The construction paper has just a little bit of texture to it. So if you want to kind of differentiate those so that you don't accidentally grab the wrong paper, I recommend writing bogus down here at the corner or just gray construction paper. It's also really important that when I say, hey, reach for that newsprint paper, that you find the right stuff. Newsprint is the cheapest paper that we use, and so I often use it as an overglue catch or kind of a mask, or just something like a cheap throwaway paper. So you would really hate to accidentally grab one of these other papers and use it in place. You end up wasting a lot of nice paper or wasting some money that way. Okay. Now we've got a couple pieces of other papers in here that I want to come back to, or I want to come to and take a look at. We'll start with maybe the highest end paper and move down from there. I made these deliberately slightly smaller than all the other papers so that they'd be very easy to identify. They have sort of a low sound, and they have a little bit of a texture on it, but one of the first things you'll notice is that they're fairly thick pieces of paper. These are your watercolor papers. They're the only paper that you have in your kit that's going to stand up to that kind of abuse. The abuse that will put a lot of water and a lot of pigment into them. So label all of your watercolor pieces watercolor. You've also got a couple of pieces of paper in your art kit that are basically the same material as the 3x5 note cards that you maybe use in other classes. They have a similar sound, and they have a similar feel. They're a fairly smooth paper, and they're about the thickness of, two pieces of standard sketchbook paper stuck together. It's called 2-ply tag board. So I would write down here at the corner, tag board. Also in that folder, you've got a couple of small envelopes. We'll need these because eventually we'll be kind of cutting up a lot of shapes, cutting up magazines, and these will fit into your sketchbook and help you stay organized in that way. You'll need at least 2 of these things. I'll provide 2 and then as many more as you may need throughout the semester. You've got a piece of paper that's almost see-through. It's sort of like a tissue paper, or this is actually called designer's vellum, but basically it's the same thing. It has a very similar sound to the newsprint paper, but it's a brighter white color. Okay, so we're going to use tracing paper this semester. Make sure that you have that tracing paper ready to go. We also have some designer's vellum that is pre-printed with a grid on the outside. It's easy to identify. It's the only piece of graph paper that we've got in the kit. One of the last pieces of paper we've got in the kit is actually slightly bigger, right? So a lot of you guys will have a messed up edge because it was a little bigger than the folder. If you hold it up to the light, you'll notice that it actually has a little bit of a watermarked grid in it. But one of the things you'll notice is that it's a little thicker than your sketchbook paper, and on one side it has a ribbed texture. This is charcoal paper. Label in the corner charcoal so that when we do our charcoal drawings, you're ready to go with a piece of paper that will actually hold the charcoal off of the drawing medium. Everything in this folder can stay home at your studio until I give you the instructions to bring it to school. At the beginning of the semester, it's really important that I get all of this material in your hands to send it home to you guys. So make sure you kind of find a good spot in your studio and stash this. The paints that I've given you, I recommend leaving these at home with your papers. You don't want to be traveling back and forth to home with your film canister, and you don't want to have the kind of struggle of constantly carrying this paint back and forth. And we won't need it until our drawing and painting unit. What does need to come back and forth to school with you is your art tube with a cap on the bottom and a cap on the top. And I recommend threading that thing in place. Your art tube should be fully loaded with all of its other art materials ready to go in class. You should come prepared with your straight edge, and you should come prepared with your cutting mat in the back. I'll see you in class, guys.